Welcome back to the Paradigm Shift. My name is Wrath, and I'm here with Jewel.
Hey,
Today, we are going to be continuing our discussion on Soul Science, Know Your Soul by Steve Madison. Last time, we arrived at a very basic idea of the soul via briefly reviewing the Leibnizian monad. Now, let's talk bodies versus souls. Madison says, immaterial souls aren't part of material bodies and aren't located in material bodies. They link to them. They are like remote pilots controlling physical drones far away. A pilot and a drone are, however, two entities in an immanent world, separated by an immanent distance. They belong to the same local order. A soul and its body, by contrast, have the relationship of a transcendent entity to an immanent entity. They are separated non-locally, which is to say, they are entangled. Just as the average human mind cannot grasp quantum mechanics, non-locality, and entanglement, the average human mind cannot grasp how transcendence relates to immanence. Science, which is based on sensory picture thinking, cannot conceive of transcendent, non-local relationships. They stand outside its paradigm. They are conceptual, not perceptual. They are mathematical, not scientific. They are rational, not empirical. When Madison says transcendent, they mean outside space and time. And when they say immanent, they mean inside space and time. So anything of matter, desk, body, that's immanent.
people's material conditions they experience in their life, what makes up your life, people's struggles happening in this world are all imminent
Yes.
conditions. It's transcendent. It's outside this world. You're the domain of mind, outside space and time.
As we discussed last time, Leibnizian monads are transcendent. I think to elaborate further on this, here's another quote from the same book, different chapter. This is a key point. Numbers, concepts, language, forms, reason, and logic, laws, principles, and so on are not part of the empirical material order of the temporal, contingent, and observable. They belong to the rational mental order of the eternal, necessary and unobservable. The truth that 1 + 1 = 2 is a transcendent thing. So other things like mathematics, thinking, language, as we defined in the first discussion, these would be unextended, right? So like another word for transcendent, unextended. Just a disclaimer, I don't know if they're absolutely philosophically interchangeable, but you can also think of what is transcendent as unextended because it's outside of space-time.
Right.
Yeah. The material body enables us to know the things that are of the material world. This is empirical knowledge, truths of fact. True knowledge can be attained only by the immaterial mind. This is rational knowledge, comprising truths of reason. Science deals with truths of fact and mathematics with truths of reason. Science deals with the temporal and contingent order, which can't explain itself because it has a beginning in time. And that means there must be something outside time to cause it. Mathematics, by contrast, deals with eternal and necessary order, which can explain itself since it's uncreated and uncaused. Hence, its sufficient reason is encoded directly, analytically into it. That's a very important distinction for viewers who have not read the material. Obviously, it's broken down a million times over all the books, but when we talk about science dealing with truths of fact, things that are contingent, you're not dealing with the same category of knowledge. You don't need to observe anything to know that 1 + 1 = 2. But you do need to observe like that it's raining outside to say that
Right.
go ahead.
Certain types of people, they tend to prioritize or strongly prefer that category of knowledge, like contingent fact, experiential sense data, um, which is a thing. Just like no one is denying that the conditions you see, or we all see when we go walk outside our front door, whether or not it's raining, whether or not the sun is shining. No one is denying those things may be correct in that moment on that day, whatever it is, but it's not eternal truth.
Right.
It could easily not be true. It's dependent on the conditions that day, what's happening, whether it's raining or not. If it is raining, it could not be raining. That is a contingent fact. And I think that it's easy for some people just to eject all critical thinking when things seem obvious to us. Like, there's a tree, it's right there. What are you, stupid? Like, of course it's there. I mean, what do you want? It's raining outside. Of course it is. It's like the assumption based on it being obvious, being based on it being right in front of our faces.
Even something like gravity, people could take that for granted in a way where it's like, well, I know if I drop an apple, it's gonna land on the ground. What do you say about that? Okay, go to a different planet,
Right.
or go out in space. So like even the truth or the fact really of gravity, that changes depending on where you are.
Yeah.
These are all.
So that person might consider is unshakable eternal truth is colored entirely by their personal experience. Like it could be not true under different conditions in space, for example, or on another planet, but it's just based on the everyday reality that we're used to that breeds these kind of assumptions, I think.
Yeah, yeah, it's right in front of you, so you take it for what it is, or
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
what you perceive it to be, I should say. But then, let's say the Pythagorean theorem. That's true on Mars. That's true in the 1900s. That's true in the 3000s. That's
Yep.
something that it's eternal, and it's not going to change whether you're observing it or whether you're in the future or the past. I sound kind of silly, but it's to illustrate the difference between truths of fact and truths of reason.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's probably the best way of understanding it. Mathematical truth is an eternal truth of reason. It applies no matter where you are, no matter what your surroundings or conditions are, it always remains true. But a contingent truth of fact is something that, you know, it might seem obvious to people because it's right in front of our noses. We walk outside and we see whatever fact is present that day, but it's not eternal. You would be able to say that being true must be in all cases. It could easily not be.
Another type of transcendent truth would be like the syntax of language, right? I'm not saying the immanent language like Portuguese or English, like if I want to communicate in English, I make these sounds. But if I want to communicate an idea in any language, the syntax needs to be a certain way, in a way like music, right? The information I am conveying has to be in a certain syntax to be
Right.
true, to make sense. And so
Yeah.
the particular way of how you pronounce words and communicate is one thing, right? That's an imminent thing. But what I'm trying to do is convey an idea to you. And
Sure.
the idea is transcendent. It's outside space and time.
Yeah. Like kind of like we were saying before, the videos long ago about the musical theory of existence. We were talking about as a musician or as a composer, a lot of times you're trying to capture this unspoken thing, this kind of like soul music, or
Yeah.
like music of the spheres, if you will, that is outside space and time, like sort of a it's almost like a concept in a way, in the sense that it only is like something you have in your mind. It's like
Yes.
something you're trying to grasp, and you might be unsuccessful in your attempt, but the language you use to make that attempt is, for example, the language of music, of notes, of like these certain frequencies arranged in a certain way, you
Yes.
know. And we might use tropes that are reflective of the imminent reality we live in.
Yeah, there's that idea, the transcendent, the idea, but the expression of it, or even the attempted expression of it, that is the imminent thing. You know,
Yeah.
that's going to be your truth of fact or science. We're just trying to distinguish the difference between scientific fact and necessary truth that is true by means of definition. You know, what
Mm.
the thing is.
We have this idea that we've been playing with where it's we have transcended eternal truths of reason versus contingent temporal truths of fact. And this is the realm of science. How a string vibrates
Mhm.
can is something that can be studied by science. Like that, those kind of things. But I also think it's interesting that we have a sub level to contingent truths of fact, because contingent truths of fact can be somewhat relied upon in this world we live in. Science brings us many advancements, and it has tremendous use value. Research, findings, all these things add value to our lives. But you have people, for example, Andrew Tate, who I've heard talk about before in the past. I've heard talk about how whatever research or whatever findings have been conducted are subordinate. They take a back seat to his personal experience. So this is not like everyone on earth thinking experience is the truth. This is like more devolved than that. This is like what is true is what I personally experience as true. And if you come at me with something counter to that, or you come at me with some kind of like research on the subject that is different, then I will reject that. Inherently very, very narcissistic, really, if you think about it. Because it's like me. Only what I think and what I have experienced matters. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think he was like saying this in regards to female drivers, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, do you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
yeah.
Yeah,
He talks about how women can't drive, and then somebody shows him a bunch of statistics that prove
yeah,
otherwise, and he says, "Well, every time I've been in a car with a woman, it's been terrible." And
exactly.
so yeah, like, and what's really dangerous about this? Obviously, smart people look at that and they write it off like this guy's delusional, right? But he has a cult. He's a cult leader.
True.
You know, a bunch of 9-year-olds that hate their moms right now. They take what he says and they turn it into what they believe to be a philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awful. But yeah, people like that, it's it's dangerous that becomes popular because then you can basically just whatever you decide your truth is true for everything and everyone. It's not good.
Yeah, extremely dangerous. It gives us a very bad outlook for the future of our species on this planet because we have more and more people subscribing to that cult of me, then they garner followers who are like, oh yeah, what you say goes. Um, so it's like you said, any intelligent or halfway intelligent person will laugh when they hear that, but apparently halfway intelligent people do not make up a big part of our population now.
Yeah.
Because so many people fall for this shit.
Yeah, well, the thing about Tate is obviously he's a narcissist, so he can't be wrong. He can never say I'm wrong.
Yep.
My mistake. I don't know if you've seen. He did an interview recently with a psychologist,
No.
and well, basically, the psychologist starts probing him, like, "Why are you like this?" You know, and he gets really close, and then Tate kind of backpedals, and he's like, "Look, I'm like this because I need to survive, and I not just survive, but I need to thrive." The psychologist isn't buying it. It's a pretty entertaining interview. I don't want to clip it here because I don't. Andrew Tate does not like clips do not belong here,
right.
we can discuss the psychologist, the expert, right, in the mind, gets him to stop and think about and then construct in real time a delusional narcissistic argument as to why Tate is right and the psychologist is wrong. It's incredible. So like people like that, obviously you can't be reasoned with because they're not honest. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that, I mean, obviously that was an aside, but I think it's good. It's valuable because, like, really, it started out being a comment on valuing experience
Yes.
over eternal truth, and I think even though that is like a really dumb example,
Yeah, yeah.
that is like valid. I
It's no,
think.
it's a great example because it even shows when you value the experience to a detriment, you stop valuing scientific facts even.
Yeah,
Yeah, you don't even value fact anymore. It's just
yeah,
opinion. Yeah, terrible.
yeah.
So just to hammer this home, it's really important that we distinguish in this video the difference between truths of fact and truths of reason. That's what this is for. And to help us with that, I have a quote from Dr. Cody Newman's Ontological Mathematics for the Curious, an Introduction to Ontological Thinking. It's a really great book. I highly recommend it. Link in description. It's like 40 pages long, so it's a short read, especially for these authors. Dr. Newman says, no sensory data is self-explanatory. Hence, there are no sensory facts in any authentic sense. What are the sensory facts of animals, hawks, and sharks, of ants, bees, and spiders? How would we know? We have no clue. There are no absolute facts in sensory terms. Sensory facts are always mired in subjective interpretation. First, they are interpretations of the sense organs used to collect them. Then they are the interpretations of the brain-mind circuitry that lies beneath the sense organs to convert their raw data into comprehensible information. Then they are the interpretation of the particular framework of understanding applied to them. So, all facts are actually nothing of the kind. They are interpretations. And only when you grasp that can you grasp that science can never deliver truth, only sensory utility. As Nietzsche definitively said, there are no facts, only interpretations.
Once again, I think it's really interesting how in that quote you were reading, everything passes through so many filters: sense organs, brain mind circuitry, and then our own subjective understanding. And many of us are victim to some sort of cognitive or mental distortion of some kind. Many people on the planet are, for lack of a better word, mentally ill in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, who
So
isn't?
it's like, yeah, go ahead.
No, who isn't? You
Yeah,
know,
well, yeah,
who doesn't have, like even the smartest people I know, they still have their predispositions towards what they encounter.
sure.
Yeah. So
Their own biases.
yes,
Um, and I mean, we all have those biases. That is correct. But if you, for example, are someone who is disconnected or out of touch with reality itself, with objective reality, what is really going on, if you fail reality testing on a daily basis and you only live in your personal fantasy world, then these contingent truths, which have to pass through so many filters, by the time they get to that, they pass through that final filter of your own subjective interpretation and understanding, then that is more than likely not going to resemble anything true at all.
yes,
So
yes,
that is very interesting. I think that would apply to a great number of people on this planet.
yeah,
Um, that's very interesting to me. That in so many cases we're our own worst enemies in that regard, but because we're so used to living inside our own skin, whether we're healthy or not, we just make those assumptions. Like,
yeah,
yeah, it's I saw with my own eyes. It's kind of like Trump and his whole the election was stolen from me kind of thing. My point is not so much about Trump himself, because you can certainly make the argument that he might not really believe that truly. He's
Right.
just saying shit just to get what he wants. But in terms of his followers, his cult followers, to really believe that, they failed reality testing. So if they're confronted with a contingent factual truth, you lost, you ran, and you lost. It's very simple, like that kind of thing. When they're confronted with that, they deny the truth because that filter that has to pass through their own biases, what they want to believe, it doesn't stand a chance passing through that filter. The countless excuses they come up with, or just flat out denying reality, or you're lying about that, things like that. That is like a great example, I think, of complete and utter failure of reality testing. What kind of world are we left with? Are we left with a world where everyone has their own subjective truth? Or are we left with a world of alternative facts, like that one lady said? And this, I think, points out some of the weaknesses of only relying on your subjective interpretation or your own experience, or what you want to be true.
Yeah. Okay, so with the distinction that facts and truths are different and they're different categories, one is contingent and one is necessary, one is an absolute truth of reason, and then the other one is factual, so it can be true sometimes. It depends on, it depends. That's what it means to be contingent. So with that in mind, we can keep going. Madison says, only the soul can understand ultimate reality, because the soul is ultimate reality, the fundamental functional unit of existence. The likes of Pythagoras and Plato understood this. Science does not understand it. Science rejects the soul and all the knowledge of the soul. Science begins and ends with the body's sense organs, and the observations they conduct. Science relies on the limited, fallible, unreliable, and delusional human senses, which is exactly why it's doomed. On the statement about Pythagoras and Plato, Pythagoras saying that number rules all, and Plato's realm of perfect forms shows that there is something transcendent that exists outside space and time. This is what science refuses to engage with. Again, because this category of knowledge, the a priori, transcends the paradigm of immanence. You can't measure or observe what is unextended.
That actually reminds me that a priori, we can think of that as being synonymous with truths of reason, mathematics, those kind of truths. By contrast, a posteriori, there's two different pronunciations of those. One is British, one is American. So I might be mixing those two up, so forgive me, please. But a posteriori is based on contingent truths of fact, and you arrive at conclusions based on observation,
Yes.
things you observe in the real world. I observe the sky is blue or something, so that is an a posteriori truth. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Yeah, I am seeing that the grass is green. That's
Yeah.
a posteriori. Madison says this is the whole problem. Observing something doesn't tell you what it is, it doesn't explain it. The immediate experience of observation does not constitute knowledge. To be converted into knowledge, mediation is required for all experiences, and that is provided by forms, by concepts, by language, by the intelligible order of reason and logic, by mathematics. I really hope we've distinguished the two: body, space-time, contingent; mind, soul, truths of reason, logic, mathematics, and how they're two separate categories. And science only deals with the material, the body, and space-time and contingent facts. It does not deal in truths of reason.
And also, it denies those. It says those are not real truths of reason. It denies the mind,
It does.
the soul, if you want to call it that. denies the soul because it's not something you can touch. It's
Yeah.
not something you can see with your eyes.
And ironically, it relies so heavily on mathematics to make sense of any of its observations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the greatest irony. So I would like to show everyone a glimpse into the next few discussions we're going to have. Now that we've really separated those two, we can see how the unextended creates the extended and interacts with it mathematically. So I want to show a clip of a Fourier transform. It's just a little short clip from 3 Blue 1 Brown, really good YouTube channel. If you want to learn more about Fourier transforms, there is another link in the description to a 20-minute explanation from the same channel. Please check that out. But I just want to foreshadow the next couple discussions with this video, keeping in mind what we've just discussed about the difference between the two categories, body and soul. Soul being mind.
Here, we look at the math behind an animation like this one, what's known as a complex Fourier series. Each little vector is rotating at some constant integer frequency, and when you add them together, tip to tail, the final tip draws out some shape over time. By tweaking the initial size and angle of each vector, we can make it draw pretty much anything that we want. And here, you'll see how. This particular animation has 300 rotating arrows in total. Go full screen for this if you can. The intricacy is worth it. When you consider the chaotic frenzy that you're looking at, and the clockwork rigidity underlying all the motions, it's bizarre how the swarm acts with a kind of coordination to trace out some very specific shape. And unlike much of the emergent complexity you find elsewhere in nature, this is something that we have the math to describe and to control completely. Just by tuning the starting conditions, nothing more, we can make this swarm conspire in all of the right ways to draw anything that you want.
I want to cut the audio and kind of zoom in here. So you can see here that this is just a bunch of circles rotating. And yet it's creating this 2D image. And I don't think it's much of a leap mentally to imagine if it's going like up and down and left and right. If there was other circles going like forward and back, right? Like another axis to create a 3D. Obviously all this is happening in time. So it's to create a 6D projection, right? It should be a very intuitive at least, but also pretty obvious that the activity of circular motion can create anything.
Yeah. And I really find it interesting too that, say, for example, an illustrator or like some sort of artist who may have no interest whatsoever in math, in these kind of topics, if they saw that zoom in that you did of how the actual math is working, they would probably reject it or they would find it boring or something. But I just find it so interesting how that produces something we can look at and enjoy the beauty of, like an actual finished art piece. And a lot of us would never even suspect that an analytic subject, when we have mathematics itself, which is reason, this is the realm of truths of reason, like we even talked about, when we have that informing contingent fact, which is your final art piece, whatever it is, whatever you're drawing. I thought that correlation, that marriage between the two, one informs the other, I think is extremely interesting.
Technically, there's an equation that results in that 2D image, right? All of that was happening can be defined by an equation. And that's the thing, is that mathematics isn't a dry thing on paper that you do for your taxes. It is alive. It is, and all of its collective calculations, all of the minds in the universe creating space-time together via that Fourier transform right there, like all of the waves that are produced by the circular motion.
Right.
Yeah, it's really mind-blowing to stop and think about that, and perhaps anyone that's never encountered a Fourier transform art piece, it's incredible that this is how minds can create something just by thinking. So keep that in mind. Imagine that Fourier transform art. And let me read you this quote from Ontics, The Revolutionary New Physics by Mike Hockney. The whole of reality takes place within one point, the singularity. Every monad is itself a singularity within the singularity. So there is no extension at all, except in one very specific mathematical sense. Monads, mental singularities, are made of sinusoids, which are also singularities. These sinusoids are pure frequencies. A pure frequency domain can, via ontological Fourier mathematics, project a space-time domain, and it is that projected domain where extension exists. It is vital to grasp that this projected domain never goes outside the frequency singularity. It is mathematically inside it. It is an internal hologram. So, it seems to have extension, but in an absolute sense it does not, since it is entirely bounded by a singularity, which of course has no extension. The simplest way to wrap your head around this apparent conundrum is to imagine one of your dreams. Each dream seems to have extension, but it's not as if your dream smashes out through your head, is it? The extension is a construct. The dream happens within your mind and is always bounded by your mind, and can never extend outside your mind. It's extended within your mind, but your mind is a singularity. Now, this extraordinary situation is a thought that cannot occur to scientists who believe in real extension. That's amazing. Yeah, I think that ties it all together.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So again, there is the domain of body, the immanent, and the domain of mind, the transcendent. The immanent domain is contingent upon the transcendent, and you have minds, souls, monads, performing mathematics that project space-time internally, and that is what we are experiencing right now. You watching this video is a collective internal projection from all the minds in the universe. Next week, we're going to talk more about how that happens. We're going to talk about being versus becoming. So, episode 1, we defined monads. Episode 2, we've shown the two categories, body, soul. Now we're going to talk about that interaction next time with being versus becoming. I hope this was helpful. I hope you had fun watching this video. As always, all the links to all of our resources are in the description, the other books we've referenced, and of course, Steve Madison's Soul Science, Know Your Soul in the description. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.
See ya.